The word karma has traveled a long way from its origins. It has been borrowed, lightened, turned into a bumper sticker. But in its original context, in the precise language of the Pali Canon, it carries a weight that most people have never felt. Because the Buddha was not talking about cosmic balance, he was talking about the mind, your mind. And he was saying that every moment of unconscious thinking is already a cause, already moving toward an effect, already shaping the quality of the life you are living. Welcome to Mindfulness. What we are building together in this video is a full and faithful picture of that teaching. 7 parts, each one distinct. We will move through the original meaning of karma, the psychology of mental roots and latent tendencies, the hidden layer of intention the Buddha called satana, and the specific warning he gave about the thought that does most of its damage precisely because it is never seen. Stay with this one from beginning to end, it earns that attention. 1. What karma actually means. Before we go any further, we need to clear something up. Because karma is one of the most misunderstood words in modern language, you have probably heard it used casually. What goes around, comes around. That is karma. But that is not what the Buddha was pointing at, not fully. The word karma comes from the Pali and Sanskrit root karma, meaning action. In the Nibbādika Sutta, the Buddha said something that reframes the entire concept. He said, "Intention is what I call karma. Having intended, one acts through body, speech, and mind. Intention is karma, not just the action itself, the mental movement that precedes the action. This means karma is not a cosmic scoreboard somewhere in the universe keeping track of your good and bad deeds. It is something far more immediate. It is the way your intentions shape your inner world, and through that, your outer experience. Every time you act from greed, even in thought, you are training the mind toward greed. Every time you act from compassion, you are training the mind toward compassion. The mind becomes what it repeatedly touches. This is not metaphor. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha describes the mind as something that can be cultivated or neglected, sharpened or dulled. Like a field, what you plant grows, what you ignore dies. And the planting happens at the level of intention, which means it happens at the level of thought. Most people assume karma catches up with them eventually, somewhere in the future. But the Buddha was pointing at something happening right now, in this moment, in the quality of attention you are bringing to your own mind. The consequences of your intentions are not delayed. They begin the instant the intention arises. The mind that habitually thinks in resentment is already living in a resentful world. The mind that habitually thinks in openness is already living in a more open one. This is not punishment. This is simply how the mind works. So the question that Buddhism invites you to ask is not, what have I done wrong? The question is, what am I intending right now in this very moment? Because that intention is already karma. It is already creating something. And once you truly see that, you can never be quite as unconscious about your own thinking again. 2. The opening verses of the Dhammapada and why they hit differently. The Dhammapada begins with 2 verses that have been studied for over 2,000 years, and yet most people who encounter them move on too quickly because they seem simple. They are not simple. They are precise. The first verse says, loosely translated from the Pali, "Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox." The second verse mirrors it. If one speaks or acts with a serene mind, happiness follows as a shadow that never departs. Notice what the Buddha did not say. He did not say happiness follows good deeds. He said it follows a serene mind. The quality of the mind is the cause, the outer experience is the effect. This is a radical reorientation, because most of us are trying to fix the effect while leaving the cause untouched. We rearrange our circumstances, change our relationships, move to a different place, and then wonder why the same feelings follow us. The Buddha's diagnosis is compassionate, but direct. You brought the mind with you, and the mind was never examined. The image of the wheel following the ox's hoof is worth sitting with. The wheel does not choose to follow, it cannot not follow. It is mechanically connected. In the same way, the quality of your experience is mechanically connected to the quality of your mental habits. Not sometimes, always, without exception. Now this could feel heavy. It could feel like blame, but the Buddha intended it as liberation. If your experience arises from your mind and your mind can be trained, then you are never stuck. The same mechanism that creates suffering can be turned toward freedom. The wheel that follows the hoof can follow a different direction entirely if the ox turns. But here is the part people miss. Turning the ox is not a dramatic event. It is not a single moment of enlightenment after which everything changes. It is a practice of noticing, thought by thought, intention by intention, moment by moment. The Dhammapada is not telling you to think positively. It is telling you to think consciously. There is a profound difference between the two, and that difference is the entire path. 3. The 3 roots. What your thoughts are actually growing. In Buddhist teaching, there are 3 roots from which all unwholesome mental states arise. They appear throughout the Pali Canon, and the Buddha returned to them repeatedly because they are the origin point of suffering. They are called the 3 poisons, or in Pali, akusalamula, greed, hatred, and delusion. Every thought you have that causes suffering can be traced back to one of these 3. And understanding that is not about self-judgment, it is about seeing clearly. Greed here does not just mean wanting money, it means the quality of grasping, the thought that clings, the mental movement that says, I need this to be okay, I need this person to behave differently, I need this moment to be other than it is. Whenever you notice a thought that is reaching, pulling, demanding that reality adjust itself to your preference, that is the root of greed at work. Hatred does not just mean rage, it means aversion. The thought that pushes away, the mental movement that says this should not be happening, this person is wrong, this feeling is unbearable. I cannot stand this. Whenever you notice a thought that is resisting, hardening, rejecting, that is the root of aversion at work. And delusion, perhaps the subtlest of the 3, means the quality of not seeing clearly. The thought that assumes, that projects, that mistakes stories for truth. The mental movement that says, I know exactly what this means. I know what they think of me. I know how this will end. Whenever you notice a thought that is certain about something it cannot actually know, that is the root of delusion at work. Now here is what matters practically. These 3 roots are not your character. They are not who you are. They are tendencies the mind has cultivated, often without your awareness. And tendencies can change. The Buddha did not teach that people are fixed. He taught the opposite. The entire premise of the path is that the mind is trainable. When you begin to notice which root a thought is growing from, something shifts. You are no longer inside the thought believing it. You are observing it, and in that moment of observation, there is a small but real freedom. Not the thought controlling you, but you seeing the thought for what it is. A conditioned movement of the mind, not a verdict on reality. 4. Cetana, the hidden intention, beneath every thought. There is a Pali word that does not have a clean translation in English. It is cetana. It is usually translated as intention or volition, but it points at something more specific than those words suggest. Cetana is the directional quality of a mental act. It is not just what you think, it is the orientation behind the thinking. The Buddha placed enormous emphasis on cetana because it is the seed from which karma grows. 2 people can say the same words and create completely different karma because the intention underneath those words is different. One speaks to help, one speaks to wound. The external act looks identical. The internal act is entirely different. This means that your thoughts carry a direction that you may not always be aware of. And becoming aware of that direction is one of the most important practices in Buddhist psychology, called Abhidhamma in the Pali tradition, which describes mental factors with extraordinary precision. When you sit with a difficult feeling, are you turning toward it with curiosity, or are you using it as evidence against yourself? That orientation is cetana. When you think about a person who has hurt you, Is the thought moving toward understanding or toward building a case? That movement is satana. The thought itself is almost secondary. The intention beneath the thought is where the karma lives. Here is something worth pausing over. Most of us have never been taught to examine satana. We were taught to monitor our actions and sometimes our words. But the deeper layer, the motivational quality beneath the thought, was left unexamined. And so we repeat patterns without understanding why. We intend one thing and somehow create another because the surface intention and the deeper satana were pointing in different directions. The practice the Buddha offered is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires you to slow down enough to ask before you speak, before you act, and ideally before you even follow a train of thought. What is the quality of this intention? Is there grasping here? Is there aversion? Is there clarity? Or is there confusion? This is not about becoming paralyzed by self-examination. It is about developing what the tradition calls sampajana, clear comprehension, knowing what you are doing, why you are doing it, and whether it is appropriate. These are the three components of clear comprehension, as described in the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. It is a practice for daily life, not just for the meditation cushion. 5. How thought becomes habit, becomes character, becomes world. There is a progression that the Buddha described that modern neuroscience has since approached from its own direction, though the Buddha arrived there through direct observation of the mind, rather than through instruments. The progression is this: repeated thoughts become tendencies, tendencies become character, character becomes the lens through which you experience everything. In the Pali tradition, these tendencies are called anusaya, often translated as latent tendencies or underlying dispositions. They are not things you can see directly, they are patterns of mind that activate automatically when the right conditions appear. A person with a strong latent tendency toward anxiety will find anxiety arising in situations that someone else would move through calmly, not because their life is harder, but because the mind has been shaped over time to respond that way. The Buddha identified 7 major latent tendencies in the Pali Canon, including sensual desire, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, craving for existence, and ignorance. These are not moral failures, they are descriptions of how an untrained mind tends to move. And the word untrained is important because it implies that training is possible. Here is what this means for your daily life. Every time you follow a habitual thought without examining it, you are deepening the groove of that tendency. Every time you notice a habitual thought and choose not to follow it automatically, you are beginning to loosen that groove. The thoughts you entertain most frequently are quite literally building the architecture of how you will experience tomorrow. This is why the Buddha placed such emphasis on the quality of attention, not just in formal meditation, but in the texture of ordinary moments. The way you think about a minor frustration, the way you respond internally to a stranger's behavior, the story you tell yourself about why something went wrong, these are not trivial. They are the material from which your mind is being constructed moment by moment. There is a phrase in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha compares the mind to water. A body of water that is disturbed by wind cannot reflect clearly. A body of water that is still reflects everything precisely. The practice of attending to your thoughts is the practice of settling the water, not by forcing it to be still, but by understanding what disturbs it, and choosing moment by moment not to add more turbulence. 6. The monkey mind, teaching and what it actually requires of you. You may have heard the phrase, monkey mind. It is often used casually now to describe a busy, distracted mental state. But its roots in Buddhist teaching are more precise and more useful than the casual usage suggests. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha used animal metaphors carefully and purposefully. In various suttas, the mind that is untrained is compared to a monkey in a forest, swinging from branch to branch, never settling, never still. The branches are sense objects, thoughts, memories, anticipations. The monkey cannot stop, not because stopping is impossible, but because it has never been shown how. The teaching here is not that the busy mind is bad, it is that the busy mind is untrained. And an untrained mind is not a fixed condition, it is a starting point. What the training actually requires is something most people underestimate. It requires patience rather than force. The common mistake is to try to silence the mind by pushing thoughts away. But in Buddhist practice, particularly in the development of samatha or calm abiding, the instruction is not to suppress thought, but to notice it and gently return. Again and again, without judgment, without frustration at having wandered. This returning is the practice, not the stillness between thoughts. The act of returning. Each return is a moment of wakefulness. Each return is karma of a wholesome kind. Intention moving toward clarity rather than away from it. There is a teaching in the Anapanasati Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness of breathing, where the Buddha describes a gradual calming. The practitioner notices the breath, notices when the mind has wandered and comes back. The wandering is not failure, the noticing is the practice. What this means for you, sitting in ordinary life without a formal practice context, is that every moment of noticing your own thinking is a moment of genuine practice. You do not need to be on a retreat. You do not need hours of silence. You need the willingness to pause even for a single breath and ask, where is the mind right now? What is it doing? What is it building? That question asked sincerely is already the beginning of the path the Buddha described. Not a dramatic awakening, a quiet, consistent turning of attention toward what is actually happening in the mind. That is the practice. And it is available to you in this moment exactly as you are. 7. The thought you don't notice is the one with the most power. We have talked about karma, intention, mental tendencies and training. But there is one more layer that the Buddha pointed to repeatedly, and it is perhaps the most important for daily life. It is the thought you do not notice, not the thought you observe and return from, not the thought you catch midstream and examine. The thought that runs beneath the surface, so familiar, so constant, so deeply grooved into the mind's habits, that it does not even register as a thought anymore. It registers as reality. In Buddhist psychology, this is connected to the concept of papanka, a Pali word sometimes translated as mental proliferation or conceptual elaboration. The Buddha referred to this in several suttas, including the Madhupinika Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Papanka is the mind's tendency to take a simple perception and spin it into a web of associations, judgments, identities, and stories. A sound becomes a thought becomes an interpretation becomes a belief becomes the filter through which everything else is perceived. And most of this happens below the threshold of awareness. This is why the Buddha's teaching on mindfulness is not primarily about relaxation, though calm often arises from it. It is about seeing. The Pali word for mindfulness is sati, which carries the meaning of remembering or clear seeing. You are remembering to be present. You are seeing what is actually happening in the mind, rather than being unconsciously carried by it. The thought you do not notice shapes you more than the one you do, because the one you notice has already been brought into the light of awareness. It has lost some of its automaticity. But the unnoticed thought operates freely, coloring perception, driving speech and action, creating karma without any conscious participation on your part. Here is a way to understand this from the inside. Think of a belief you hold that feels like simple common sense, not an opinion, a fact, the kind of thing that is so obvious it barely seems worth questioning. Now ask yourself, when did I choose to believe this? Was there a moment when I examined it, weighed it, and consciously decided it was true? Or did it arrive quietly through repetition, through culture, through the accumulation of small, unnoticed moments? Most of our deepest convictions arrived the second way, and many of them are shaping our experience of this very moment without our awareness. The Buddha's response to this was not despair, it was investigation. The Pali word is vimamsa, discernment, the quality of genuine inquiry. Not arguing with your thoughts, not suppressing them, not replacing them with better ones, but looking at them directly with the kind of patient attention that sees clearly. In practical terms, this means developing the habit of occasionally stepping back from what feels most obvious. The thought that feels like truth, the interpretation that feels like fact, the story about yourself or someone else that has never once been questioned, and simply asking, is this what is actually happening, or is this what my mind has been conditioned to see? This is not an easy practice. Papanka is persistent. The mind wants to proliferate. It wants to take each moment and expand it into a narrative, but every time you catch that process, even once a day, even once a week, something loosens. A groove becomes slightly less deep, a tendency becomes slightly less automatic, and over time, this is how the mind begins to clear, not through a single dramatic insight, through accumulated moments of seeing, each one small, each one real, each one creating karma of a different kind, the karma of wakefulness, the karma of a mind that is bit by bit learning to see itself. The Buddha called this path the middle way, not forcing, not giving up, a quiet, sustained, honest attention to what the mind is doing, and the promise he offered, verified through his own experience and the experience of practitioners across 25 centuries, is that this attention, faithfully applied, leads somewhere real, not to a mind that never thinks, to a mind that no longer blindly believes every thought it creates. That is the freedom he was pointing toward. And it begins, as it always has, with the thought you are having right now. The Buddha did not offer these teachings to make life feel more meaningful in a vague, comforting way. He offered them as a precise map of the mind drawn from deep investigation. Your thoughts are not random, they are not trivial, they are seeds and they grow. But you are not at the mercy of what has already been planted. Each moment of genuine awareness is a new beginning. Each honest look at the mind is already the practice, not somewhere else, not later. Here, in this quiet turning of attention, the path begins. If this teaching reached something real in you, stay with that feeling. Let it ask something of you. That asking is already karma moving toward light.